POB. And obviously it has to provide savings, because one of the requirements in the previous section is that the interest rate has to be at least 200 basis points lower than the current CalPERS discount rate. So for example, if we were to do a POB now, where we know that the new discount rate is 6.8, your total interest cost has to be 4.8% or below. So that is ensuring that there will be savings. And then the question is, what do you do with those savings? We recommend, and many of the cities that we've dealt with have included that they establish under their policy how the savings should be utilized. Now, in some cases, there's no guidance on it, just that they should be utilized within the general fund for whatever use the city deems appropriate. Here, we have that the city shall set aside savings generated from the issuance of POBs, in effect saying 100% of the savings should be set aside into either a 115 trust or a reserve, or those would be the two basic things. Alternatively, you could have a percentage that is decided every year by the council, which we have some councils that do that. They look at what the estimated savings were and what have been created, and thereby determine how much of that they want to use for general fund purposes or how much they want to set aside for future unfundeds.
I appreciate the explanation because I had questions on it, but I'm fine with it the way it is, given what you told me. But that's just my thought on it. I didn't know what was meant by set aside savings, but now
right.
I do.
By the way, that's a very good point. No, I think you make a good point. We should spell that out a little more clearly.
Yeah,
possibly.
maybe
Yeah,
that's good. You're right. Maybe that should be defined.
If that confused you, it's going to confuse an awful lot of people. So
well, yeah, and the reason why, because I was concerned if we were, well, and now that we're going to have the supermajority on the general fund stabilization reserve, it makes me feel better too, because I'm like, well, why wouldn't we be using that why would we use that for anything other than?
Well, you know what? I think we can solve the problem by taking out the word set aside. The city shall use savings generated from the issuance of pension obligation bonds, and those shall be deposited into the 115 trust or the general fund reserve. And therefore, we avoid that confusion.
And Bud, would that require this set aside of all of the savings? I don't know if the
well, yeah, I mean, the way this is worded, that was my point. This is worded that it would take all of it. And if they would like to have that maybe determined at the time on an annual basis, we could put that in. Or if they'd like to start out with a 50, whatever, some type of a split, this would be the place to put that.
Yeah, one of the arguments for the 115, Maria, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it also can be used for OPEB.
Yes.
As well, right? So it's just not, it's pension and other
pension related
post-employment benefits.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you probably have to, if you want to do a separate one for OPEB. I don't think it should. Well, I don't know. But yes, OPEB is probably the more need for that than.
Well, would you suggest that absent a separate reserve for OPEB, that you have the 115 trust, the pension policy specify that a portion goes to OPEB and a portion goes to the 115 goes to unfundeds? Or just leave that up to the council to decide? Or the dog that's barking.
Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, it's getting close to dinner time. You can tell me interested.
This is the only provision he seemed to be interested in. So.
Very good.
All right, so just a clarification on here. We've taken out set aside on both paragraphs. Is that correct?
Yes.
That first one
you were just saying that the savings generated, right?
Correct. Okay. And is there, I know that there's probably, Maria, do you have any clarification change to that with regard to OPID, or do you just want to leave it like this? Is there a specific?
Well, the way it's written now, you would not be able to put it in the OPEB, I guess. Well, no, you would,
you
because the
could.
115
Yeah.
could be utilized that way.
Okay,
Yes,
that's a
okay.
clarification. All
Right,
right, then we're okay.
That was the argument I was making
Yeah,
for
yeah,
that.
absolutely.
you.
Yep, yep.
Thank you, because I got a little confused there for a minute,
No, that's great.
and I appreciate it. All right.
Do we want, the only thing, so my concern is, again, just for clarity's sake, do we need to define though the savings so that everybody's understanding of what we're talking about there? That it's that differential? Because otherwise, I just don't want anybody, I mean, I don't know, maybe it is clear. I'm not, I don't speak
You
finance
know,
very.
we could
so-
certainly add a definition of savings in that paragraph if you'd like, in that provision.
I just don't want someone thinking, and coming along and interpreting it broader than we intended and then
Yeah.
accusing us of some kind of malfeasance just because, their idea of what savings is and our idea of the savings are two
Right.
different
Right.
things.
So essentially, Julia, you're right. It's hard to, we'd have to come up with a good definition, which is essentially what the schedule of payments would be under the POB, and then what the annual schedule based on investment returns that PERS, because that you have a set you would have a set payment schedule against a variable schedule.
Yeah, it's like we'd see a little formula. That's what I'm envisioning. I don't know if it's that simple, but it'd be nice.
It is. It's going to be what the there's technical terms that are escaping me at the moment, but PERS provides you your unfunded and what your payments are going to be dependent upon, basically saying here's your rate, and what we're running against that is what the set schedule would be on the POB.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the difference between them would be the savings.
Right. But
That,
Maria?
yeah, I think that will only work. It's not really gonna work. It'll have to be at a specific point of time. This is the amortization schedule of CalPERS versus the debt service for the pension obligation bonds.
Exactly. Yeah,
Once
that's
we
correct.
pay the UIL from POB, we are not gonna get any more schedules for the unfunded liability because it's gone. Supposedly, that's what the issuance of the POB is. So it will be at a specific point of time, the UIL by CalPERS versus the debt service of the POB.
okay.
So it's really hard to really see savings that way, because if we stay with CalPERS, that difference will change, or I mean the UAL changes every year depending on the rate of return and other demographics, other assumptions.
How about we change it to this then? We say something to the effect of any designated savings amount determined by the city shall be set aside or put in the deposit in the 115 trust or general fund pension stabilization rate. Just so I'm just trying to, I don't want to get rid of the section because I think it's a good section to have, but I think we need to just be careful on how we word it so that we're not like I don't want to dig ourselves into a hole we can't.
Well, I think Maria's suggestion is the one that's best. That when there's the issue, if there's an issuance, what I think she was trying to say is that when the POB is issued, if it's issued, that that you're looking at that across in comparison to the CalPERS schedule, and that's the only. And then you're just going to have to say these are the savings that would be theorized. I guess, or recognized as part of, because you're issuing it based on that premise.
Correct.
So therefore, whatever that savings is, and then it really becomes a question, if you're going to put it into in the 115, then why would, if these are already going to be funds that you're then going to set aside for savings, I think it's actually too aggressive, if I can say that, to say all of the savings would be set aside. I don't know, maybe I'm hedging a little bit, but if there is realized savings in doing this, I certainly think at least half of it should go to the 115, and I would say 115 versus the general fund stabilization. But
Why don't, how about putting in, I do have a city that actually did that they have 50% of the estimated savings from the schedule would go into a 115 trust. The other 50% would be utilized in the general fund as determined by the council.
yeah, and that that I don't know, Maria, what do you think?
Yeah, the whole, I think issuing POBs to reduce our UAL and seems to me we are trying to eliminate that liability so that we should be able to save some of the money for our use.
Right.
Not
Right.
for-
Right.
not for paying.
But I would, but you also want to hedge
The
on
future,
the
right. Future
That's right.
unfunded. Yep.
That's why I think
Okay.
if you did half of the and it would just be whatever the
How about saying up to 50%? So you're not absolutely saying that you're doing, absolutely have to do 50. Or do you want to have it that you have to do 50%?
I'm also taking into account the OPEB. So
Right.
I don't know. I guess it would be staff's recommendation if we were to do this, that half of the money be set aside into a trust to hedge for the future. And then that leaves the other half
For OPEB, if
for
you need.
appropriation, however the council.
Yeah. Okay, we'll change that to 50%.
How does the vice mayor and council member feel about that?
I'm okay with the recommendation. How about you, Councilmember Curlow?
Yes, I'm okay with that recommendation as well. I think that wording too will be very helpful for future reference of this policy.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
What did they mean by that?
Yes.
Okay, so are we good on that? Funding of new UAL, this is just kind of almost unnecessary language because it's pretty obvious. But it sets as a policy, well, it's a target for repaying any newly created UAL in a timely manner as to not incur unnecessary interest rate charges. That's pretty obviously that you want to do that. Annually, CalPERS charges, we say in here, the 6.8%. So the next paragraph is the intended schedule for paying off any newly created UAL. Now, you don't have to have this provision in, but some cities do, where you identify at the time a new UAL is created, a timeline that is your intended goal for eliminating that UAL. And in this case, a typical one would be to say the newly created UAL shall be 20 years from the date that the city receives notice that it has that UAL. That would play into, if you're doing a POB, you would do a POB for 20 years. And if you're funding a 115, you would fund the 115 to a level that, based on doing that annually with anticipated earnings, you would clear up that unfunded within 20 years. You could say 10 years, you could say 5 years, you could say, longer if you want, or you could eliminate this completely and not even deal with this type of a provision.
Is that provision something that we should keep if it's something that we don't have to in the policy?
Well, we're saying shall be, and then we're putting in years. So we're really saying that the city is kind of committing to addressing unfundeds with a time frame not to exceed whatever they use. And we identify in here where your various sources would be, from 115 trust, from the rate stabilization, pension rate stabilization reserve, additional allocations made through the budget, or through issuing of pension obligation bonds. But you would be committing that if you have unfundeds in the future, this is the time frame you're going to utilize one of these following sources to pay it up within that time frame.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
And again, 20 years is just a suggestion. So if you want to be more conservative, you can say 25 or 30 years, so you don't have to do too much, which is sort of consistent with now CalPERS new amortization schedules are all going to be 20. Prior, they were 25 and 30. You could make it 10 years, but that puts a little more burden on making sure that you're setting aside the right amount of money.
Mhm.
Again,
Or
this
you
is
could
only
set up-
if there's a new one funded.
Okay.
I'm gonna look at
Isn't it theoretical? I mean, I guess I'm trying to play devil's advocate on the theories here. So if we're setting aside savings into a 115, and if new UAL is created, would that not be paid by the accrued savings in the 115?
Yeah, you could pay it off faster than 20 years.
What do you think about that, Maria?
I'm thinking, I think maybe like John, that once we've funded the UAL and then we have new UAL, I'm thinking we should be able to pay that every year
Yes.
from
Okay.
either.
Hey, we don't have to have this provision in at all. I mean, it's just one,
Yeah.
because it's appeared in several others. I thought you should at least have an opportunity to take a look at it
I
and
think
see
we
if
take
it
it out.
makes sense. But you're in a better funding position maybe than many cities, and I agree with you. I think if you're funding your 115, you're particularly with the way you're generating revenues, that would serve for that purpose.
Instead of just, if we have new UAL, instead of paying just what
Right.
CalPERS wants us to pay, we pay the full amount if we can.
Hold up, right?
Yes.
Whether from our budget or from this reserve or from the section 115, so that it doesn't build up again.
This provision generally is utilized if you've issued a POB and you've paid it all off, so you're starting at zero, and then this provision would make more sense.
Mhm.
If you weren't doing a 115, bud?
Yes. Well, no. Well, 115 would be one of the options that you would use. You would put that money into. But if you didn't have a 115, then it would come from other funds.
So how does the committee feel about that?
I'm inclined, I mean, I think you can probably take it out for now. It's not like we can't add it in. We need later to.
All right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is again a living document that can be changed every year, and whenever the circumstances are appropriate for that, you could certainly add it at a later time.
Well, I think it's good that it's in, because I think there needs to be the policy of what to do with it. But I guess
maybe we could make the wording not quite so definitive. We're
Mhm.
saying the intended schedule. I think the idea is at the city's discretion, something like that.
Hmm.
The
I
city
mean, it almost
shall-
seems like it should be a second. So by talking about the set aside savings would be used to fund new UAL for the express purpose of funding it.
Right.
It's like like the funding of the new UAL should be part of the set aside,
Mhm.
or the.
So we should bring
the
it
annual
back up
pension
into the set aside language.
combined into one, and basically
Yes.
saying that you're putting this money aside to pay that off.
You know what?
Yeah.
That's a great idea. So why don't we work on that? We'll come up with some wording for everyone to look at, and incorporate that into the savings generated from the POBs. Because that's the more likely event that would become really relevant, as
I
Maria
like that
points
idea
out.
better. Yeah.
Yep.
Because
I'm good
without a
with-
POB, you already have unfunded that you're dealing with. So yeah, so let's do it that way. I like that. I didn't think of that. That's great. Okay.
I mean, I got to be candid. If we go do this, so one of my concerns, I guess, and this is why the 115. So if you're putting half that savings away each year, and if And if PERS is doing what they say they think they can do, that 115 balance should grow.
Yeah,
And you should have
definitely.
sufficient funds to be able to.
And you're
pay
going to be
it.
investing it. And one of the beauties of the 115 is that you're not limited to your investment policy. You can go beyond that if you decide you want to be a little more aggressive than the limitations that you have. You don't have to, but you would have the availability to do that. The state provided that when they passed that legislation. Okay, that gets us to the last, basically, two items. The super funding. This is one that some cities have used this, and it can be a catalyst for discussion among employees. And it's stating here in effect that if you're at super funded status and you're at that status for any period of time, meaning you're more than 100% funded at CalPERS, you're sitting there with that excess. You don't want to have any of the employees feel that you should be able to utilize that money to increase their benefits or all of that. Now, I don't know if you want to have that in the policy or not. Some like to have it. Some feel that it creates unnecessary discussions. And so, we have it in there for you to look at. And I don't know, it's really up to how you feel about that. It's really not necessary to say that.
How do you feel about that, Maria?
I like it.
You like it? All right.
It didn't feel like a lightning rod when I read it, but I see the point. But I think it's, I mean, I don't know.
I'm
And
good
not
with
our
it
state,
staying
I
in.
don't know.
Member Carello?
I'm okay with it.
Okay,
I don't
good.
have
good
any
with
questions.
staying in.
Yeah, okay.
Well,
we will leave it
I
in.
just
That's
told
good.
you, in my career, this has happened. PERS
right.
PERS was
Yeah.
funded.
Right.
We were not. There was not the employer side contributions that are now. I mean, that's the part that it's just.
Yep.
It's amazing where we're at today, where we were in the early in the 90s,
Late 90s.
where we didn't have employer contributions because it was funded, and then the
It's always-
benefit enhancement, and that's the whole reason you're saying it. And we were negotiating, they were saying, well, the school district's not having to pay the 7%, contribution, so we want that as a 7% raise. And how we dealt with that at that time was one time off schedule kinds of stuff, because we said, this isn't forever. We can't give you a permanent 7% raise just because we're not paying it this year, because that's just going to happen. So we dealt with that in one-time off-schedule payments. That's how we dealt with it back then. But it is a real thing, because once they look at your, and I'm not suggesting that the employer's side, but when they look at it being super funded or where there's funds available, then there must be room for other benefits.
Hi, this is Patrice. From the standpoint of negotiations, I think that certainly, I don't know if this will garner much attention. It might just get approved without them noticing. But then if we ever did achieve superfunded status, I think they would definitely come for additional salaries or what have you. But I think the way to defend it is, this is securing their pension into the future
Right.
Absolutely. No, that's the that's the response to that. That
Yeah.
this is insurance for their benefits in the future.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I feel comfortable in defending that at the table.
Okay, great. Okay, and then the last thing is this transparency that we suggested, and I know, John, you asked Rob, and I think he did send you some an example of a couple of cities, the way that they show that on their website. I think, Marie, you already do a very good job of this. of being very transparent on all of the financials. But this would add in the factors involving the pensions as on an annual basis to be sure that's posted for showing full transparency of what's going on in the CalPERS circumstance, and have it as part of your policy.
My only note on this was that on that line where it says the city shall make available the 5 most recent documents.
Mhm.
I don't even know how long we hold on to these things normally under a doc. We may have to hold on to them forever for document retention purposes, but we're going to abide. I mean, we would abide by our document retention, whether it's longer than that or not. We can certainly, if it's shorter, we can certainly go longer. But my point was, they're all public records that are going to be
Yeah, you know what? I think that's a
So-
great point. I think, you know what, how about just changing it to city shall make available the above listed documents consistent with their policy, with their
right, or
document
that
policy.
per the Public Records Act, these documents are they're
Fine.
public records pursuant to the California Public Records Act.
Great.
Because
Okay.
I think that
Yeah.
way we're not either limiting
I like that.
ourselves or
Yes.
or saying something inadvertently that's not consistent with the law. So
I like that. I think that's a great suggestion. So that's good. We'll do that.
But I'm not sure about the records retention things for this too, but if we're posting it on the website, do we really want to post, like, if it's like a lifetime?
no,
Well, you know
no.
what? I would just say that we could
city's
make
record
it
retention
consistent with
policy.
whatever you're comfortable with, making it so that it is, if somebody really wanted to see it, that it's available to them. I
Right.
think that's the point.
And
I mean-
pursuant to applicable law or something like that, so it's.
Yeah.
Because it's available here
Right.
to anybody.
Not on the website.
But
I
on the
would say you just
website-
post, you could just post annually the most current. And then
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you want to post anything at all or commit to posting anything at all and just have the rest of it available subject to the Public Records Act.
I think that's good. If that's okay, Marie, would that work?
Yeah, I'm just
Let's
thinking.
remove reference to the city's website.
Yeah, you guys can just do that without actually having it in your policy either. too.
Right.
Yeah, but that does, we don't have to have that.
Yeah.
We can eliminate on the city's website. Just say the city shall make in order to achieve this transparency, the following information shall be made available. Period.
Subject to the Public Records Act.
To the public,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
easy to switch.
So per the Public Records Act,
Yeah, pursuant to the California Public Records Act or
great, okay,
consistent with the California Public Records Act. any of
okay,
that.
great, sure,
And
that's
cities
easy.
adopted retention policy, records
Yeah.
retention.
And applicable retention policies.
Maria, are there any items here that you would prefer not having? I think the
No.
important one would be the valuation reports for sure. Your audited statements you do anyway,
Mhm.
and the budget you do anyway. So then the only other thing would be and I, certainly that shouldn't be a problem with the 115 trust, right? What's in any of those trusts?
Fund balances are
Fund
all
balances?
public record.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And then, of course, the last part of this is that you're stating that there's going to be a periodic review. And most cities use a 5-year review policy, but it can be done annually, it can be done earlier. But you're going to do it at least every 5 years, you'll review the policy. And of course, everything needs to be approved by the council. And that's it.
It's good to me.
We went right through that.
Yeah, so we'll provide a new draft for everybody to look at, and then you can decide when you want to bring it to the council.
That's what I was gonna ask, John, with regard to the most current draft with all the changes that were discussed today. Would that be something that we need to look at to bring it to council?
Sure, we
Yeah,
could
I
have
was
one more meeting, you think maybe?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe one more meeting of this body.
Thank
We
you.
were looking at the council meeting of the 18th, but would it be that tragic to push to February 1st?
No, it wouldn't be. We can do that. So what would be the meeting date then? February
February 1st.
1. Okay, great.
For the city council meeting date.
Right.
Great.
And that, we would have to, this committee would have to meet when?
Well, I'm, if you would like to meet, you could meet again. You know, the week of the 17th, you know, a couple of weeks from now, if you felt it was necessary.
Where's Julia? Where'd she go? Oh, there's,
I'm here.
okay. If we to meet again and your availability, if we're to meet the week of the 17th.
We could
have
also,
to
if necessary, John, we could do, what's your city council meeting? Then the next one would be the 15th. So we could meet the first week, do the audit committee the first week of February, and then do the 15th for the policy.
I'm comfortable with whatever's comfortable to the council.
Let's see. Yeah, that works for me. If you guys want to meet the first week, that works for me. I'm free.
Why don't we talk about, you know, what we could do before we set that? We could set that now, actually. So if you want to figure out a day that week.
In the first week of February, do you want to do Thursday? February the 3rd?
Nikki, how does that work for you?
I'm open February 3rd
Yeah,
afternoon.
I am too.
4 o'clock, Julia?
Yeah, I actually have to be in Porterville at 6 for something else. So
Oh, great.
if we think we'll be done in an hour,
Yeah, that should be
45,
pretty fast. I
that'll
would
work.
think.
To review this before it goes to council, okay.
Yep.
All right,
So 4
So the
o'clock?
next-
Okay, great.
4 o'clock on February the 3rd.
Okay. Okay. So
I'll have to say, it's actually very refreshing to have all of the input. And the policy is really good, where it looks like it's, you know, going to shake out compared to some other policies that we've seen where maybe they don't get as much input. So it's a really good job, you guys.
yeah, I feel the same way, Nikki. All the ones I've worked on, we've never had this kind of input from a
For
committee.
better or worse.
Yeah, we'll see how it works out, but it's great because
Yeah,
it
it's very
eliminates a
good.
lot of the uncertainty when you're at the council meeting that this hasn't been discussed yet and thought out. So I think it's great.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's
great.
important.
And
Mhm.
everybody's ideas were terrific.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I want to say as we meet and we have the meetings that we report out what we've discussed at the meetings at the following council meeting so that they get sort of a semi-update of what we're
Great.
doing.
Terrific.
But all is appreciated. And just on a side note, Mr. Taylor, Rob Taylor, had texted when we were having a meeting. He was trying to get out and be here for the meeting. He apologized that he couldn't make it today.
No problem. We understand. We've all been there, so that's okay. So maybe now, Nikki, you want to, and Michael can go over a little bit, or Maria, whoever who wants to take the lead at this point about the way the unfunded looks under the current circumstances at CalPERS and their new tool.
Well, we'll defer to Maria. We worked with Maria a little bit and just did a scenario for a pension obligation bond for informational purposes. And we can talk a little bit about the market if that's of interest and the pension obligation bond results, or we don't have to do that at all, or we can do it behind what Maria has to report.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Okay.
Go right ahead, Nikki. That's what I
Okay.
heard.
All right. We just have two short slides that we put together, and if we can allow Michael Garcia to share the screen. He will pull up a slide about the market and just give a brief background about that. I think that's always interesting, whether you're interested in bonds or not. I think the market is interesting. And so he'll talk a little bit about that very briefly, but please jump in and with any information you have, and we're free to answer questions. And then I'll just give a very brief report of the results of a pension bond on the next slide.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. And for those who don't know me, I do see some familiar faces. John and Maria, good to see you both again. But for everyone else, my name is Michael Garcia, and I'm an associate with Oppenheimer and Company, the bond underwriter. So here we just kind of wanted to touch briefly on the market, kind of what's been going on over the past month or two, and kind of what we're seeing currently and going into the next year. Really, there's been three major factors that have been impacting Treasury rates. One is the COVID-19 Omicron variant, which I'm sure we're all familiar with by now. It's kind of been in the news daily. Another is kind of more news coming out of the Federal Reserve. And a third is inflation, which we're probably also all familiar with. Anytime you go to the grocery store, you kind of see it. But first, I'll kind of start off with the Omicron variant and that impact on the market. It was first reported in late November, and immediately afterward, we saw a pretty steep drop in Treasury rates, up to 30 basis points for both the 10 and 30 year. And that's sort of kind of a natural reaction anytime there's fear in the market. Investors flock to the safest assets, which are Treasury bonds, which typically lowers the rates since there's increased demand. And so that's kind of what we saw initially towards the end of November and maybe first week or so of December. But as news kind of kept coming out about Omicron, fear has kind of receded a little bit. You know, we're seeing that it's not quite as deadly as the Delta variant was. We haven't seen sort of like the widespread economic shutdowns like we did last year with the Delta variant. And so that's kind of eased concerns there. And now we've seen the market be more reactive to inflation and news that we're hearing from the Fed. And that's what we've seen over the past couple of weeks as rates have kind of started to creep back up to where they were before the Omicron variant, and even a little bit higher than that. Inflation, you might have seen in the news, I think last I saw maybe it was 5 or 6% on an annualized basis, which is probably the highest we've seen in decades, believe it or not. And so that's putting pressure on treasuries. And the Fed concluded the year in December with a meeting, and in that meeting, they did project 3 rate increases for 2022, 25 basis points per increase, and they also projected another 3 rate hikes in 2023. And so we're kind of seeing all of these things influence the market and influence where rates are going. But over the past couple of weeks, we've been seeing them creep up. And I think today, the 30-year was at a 2.09%, and the 10-year Treasury was about a 1.73%. That's just kind of a brief background. Yeah, rates are creeping up, but they're also still near historic all-time lows. So just trying to keep that in perspective. We're still in a really great rate environment for any sort of bond financing. Bud or Nikki, is anything you want to add about that?
I just have one comment. I found it very interesting today. Yeah. The rates really shot up this morning off of the release of the notes from the Federal Reserve meeting in December, which apparently were a little more hawkish than even Powell's comments. And the market reacted pretty violently today on that. My opinion is that is going to subside, and I still think, you're going to see these trending of the higher rates, but the fact that the 10-year went from 152 last Friday to 173 today is really an way overreaction. And we've seen this now several times. I hearken back to, what was it, Nikki and Mike, June or July, the rates were at 170 and everybody said we're going straight to 2, and we went straight to 128. So, but in general, I think we're seeing the rates starting to really definitely move up. I think they're still going to be accommodative here on into mid 2022. But good presentation. That was good chart that you provided.
Thanks, Bud. Does anybody else have any questions on that, or shall we kind of move forward into the next slide where we can discuss our model on the pension obligation bonds?
We can move on.
Okay.
Okay. And I guess just to bridge the gap a little bit from the market conversation, there was a POB that priced today for Sierra County. It was about 19 million. It only had a maturity out to 10 years. And the final interest rate in 10 years was at 278. And the interest rate in the early year, the first maturity was at 0.92. So that can give you a little bit of the range in the market where was a AA minus pension obligation bond priced today. Probably the average yield was about a 250 or a 260. So based on that market information and based on some work that we did with Maria, and she was very helpful in the pension outlook tool. We worked together on that, and we refined the analysis from the meeting of November 30th, and we refined it to include a 6.8% discount rate and changed some fiscal year payments according to Maria, and changed interest rates. And we shortened the term because when we went into the CalPERS pension tool, we generated a new amortization schedule based on all of those factors. And the shape of the amortization is a little bit different given the 21% and the 6.8. So here we have a snapshot of what a POB could look like. Again, it's extremely market dependent and interest rate environment dependent, but the par amount is approximately 44 million. The amount to pay off the miscellaneous and safety plan, you can see in the box on the right, the miscellaneous plan is about 28.8 million. And the safety plan is about 14.8 million. So combined, it's just under 44 million. That's down from the number that we had in the presentation in November, again, because we went into the CalPERS tool and we input the appropriate rate of return and interest earnings from CalPERS. And so the 21% earnings was very favorable, as I'm sure you can imagine, for the city's UAL. It reduced the size of the UAL. Kind of in tandem with that, CalPERS lowered the discount rate. And as the discount rate goes down, the UAL goes up. So there was some balancing to do there, but a net positive for the city. And you can see the estimated CalPERS amortization, approximately 4.9, 4.8, 4.7, and it's kind of a declining schedule. And so we ran just a sample. What would a POB look like in today's market for 20 years? And you can see kind of in the middle column, the 20-year POB debt service. We tried to keep the same shape as the UAL amortization. And you can see the savings in the far right column in the middle chart. And the savings are about $760,000 per year, estimated if you were to issue a POB to pay off the balance of the UAL.
Nikki, did you use
Yes.
a buffer in your interest rate calculation on those?
We did. we used a buffer of about 25 basis
Oh, great.
points.
So in other words, 25 basis points higher than where the markets are today. So that's great. Okay, good, good.
Exactly. And we don't know, like you said, we've
Yep.
seen a more dramatic interest rate increase in the last week or several weeks. Is 25 basis points. Could we go through that in a couple weeks, maybe in a couple months? We don't know, but yes, but we did put a little bit of a
Great.
buffer in the interest rates.
That's very good.
Mhm. So we did want to show you an updated POB. We thought it's just a good option to look at, to kind of always have your minds around what could a pension obligation bond provide. So it's just another tool, and good to know the result if the city were interested in using that tool. The net present value savings you can see at the bottom is about 27%. The minimum NPV savings, as kind of mandated by the state, is between 3 and 5%. So you can see it's significantly north of percent, which is why many agencies have been issuing these as one tool for kind of capping the UAL exposure. And if you have any questions, we can answer questions for you.
And just to go back to the policy, this is kind of what I was referring to, that when you issue it, that potential savings is what would be being, half of it being dedicated to the section 115, and the other, so if you look at year one and there's a $761,000 savings, half of that would be being dedicated to a 115, and the rest as determined by council. That's just to kind of reference that.
Exactly.
Yeah, also consistent with that, John, with those kind of savings, even if the CalPERS performance becomes phenomenal for several years, and then over the years of which we can show what's happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years, even if those savings are not at the 760,000 level, they're going to be in the $400,000, $500,000, or $600,000 level. So there's always going to be a reasonable amount available to utilize.
I want to say thank you for this information, because while this was going on, I was looking at what was presented back in at the last couple of meetings, and significant difference.
Mhm.
Right. The par amount, or the payoff amount, was higher previously before the calculations, and where we were looking at maybe a $54 million UAL POB, with the Outlook tool, it's now about 10 million less than that, about 44 million. So the annual savings dropped from about 850 down to about 760, but on a percentage basis, probably a little bit higher.
Yeah,
Right.
you actually have higher percentage savings on the PARM, on the total amount of the unfunded than we did before. It's just that the gross dollars are less because the unfunded is less.
Yeah. But it's a good point. We estimate these CalPERS payments, but every year your amortization schedule is changing, which again is why Maria said we'd have to set a point in time to allocate the savings to the 115. And Rob in Bud's office shared an interesting stat with us. I think it was after our last audit committee meeting, and he looked up the results of pension obligation bonds over time.
Oh, yeah.
And he said that 84% actually achieved the targeted or estimated savings. He said about 7% of the pension obligation bonds issued, because of future CalPERS performance, were at a break-even point. And about 9 of the pension obligation bonds did not meet up to the expectations, and they actually had a loss on the issuance of the pension obligation bonds. So I think it's that 9% chance that some agencies see as a risk. But I thought it was interesting that about 84% of the POBs issued at the end of their life actually did generate the estimated savings.
The 9%, was that just market driven bad timing when they were issued?
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Exactly.
So that's a cluster of 9%.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Councilmember Carrillo, where are you? I don't see you on the screen.
I'm here.
Okay,
good.
did you have any questions to this?
No, no questions.
Okay. All is appreciated. Like I said, looking at the numbers to this numbers, I see the significance, Maria. Thank you for being a part of this to help them.
Well, as an alternative, Maria put together a spreadsheet that, and that goes to the additional discretionary payment as an alternative to an issuance of a POB, which would have the city dedicating itself, as we were talking about, let's say $500,000 a year towards that, and essentially prepaying the mortgage versus refinancing it. Do you want to go through that, Maria?
Sure. I just, after I learned how to use that pension outlook tool, so it's kind of cool to see the changes that happens. So anyway. Um, so the first assumption is what is the baseline that's CalPERS is right now using, which is still at that 7% discount rate, and it doesn't show the 21.3% earnings, investment earnings. And if you look down to the total, our UIL would have been 99,770,000 for, and this is for the combined miscellaneous and safety. So the second scenario I plugged in the new discount rate of 6.8% and the 21.3% investment return. And I kept the 7% investment return for the next 19 years. And that projection reduced the UIL by almost 40 million to 59,060,000 just by using the current discount rate and investment return. And then the third scenario, I added the $500,000 ADP for 20 years, maybe, and that further reduced the total UAL to 50.2 million. So it just shows the changes, how much it could change year by year depending on the investment returns. Number 4 scenario is what Nikki had shown on their, Nikki and Michael had shown on their presentation. And using that scenario, it's based on a 6.8% investment return rate for the 19 years, for the next 19 years. The next scenario is the same assumptions, but with a $500,000 annual ADP for 20 years, which reduced UIL to a total of 59.3 million. So I used, I tried different, assumptions. I tried the 8% rate of return on the investment, And then I tried different rates, like 9 and 10, with a 4.7 in 1 year, 6.3 in 5 years, and 8.5. So anyway, any change just creates so much different total. And really, that's all I wanted to show, how much the UAL can change from year to year depending on the investment rate of return.
Mhm.
Exactly. And it is a very cool tool. And we completely support your findings here. In November, when we used, we weren't sure if the discount rate would be 6.5. There was some discussion, or 6.8, and using 6.5 discount rate, again, generated that 55 number, and then just simply using a 6.8 generated the 44 number. So it's very sensitive to that discount rate, to mortality rates and other things. But the discount rate is a very big driver, and it's very sensitive.
Yeah, and the discount rate is different from the investment rate of return.
Yeah,
and that's why you have a 6.8 discount rate, which is what they charge us, and the investment rate of return is what the fund earns during the year.
Right, and the basis of that is the 6.8 is down from their original estimate of how much needs to be earned in the fund to fully fund your retirement benefits, and that's their goal to have 6.8. That's why if they don't have 6.8, they charge the city the 6.8 to make up for the fact that that they did not get that.
Did anyone have any questions on this or any comments? I see heads shaking now. See that there, and I appreciate that information. Do you learn how to use a new tool?
I did. It's
Oh,
pretty cool.
okay.
I had to look at it for a couple of days before I finally figured out how to really do it.
Okay.
Good job. No, it was a good job, Maria. Great job on doing this.
Thank you for that. I want to say I appreciate it. I appreciate all the information that was given to us, especially being able to walk through the draft and have the conversations with the input that was provided, and having these slides that were presented with the market, the commentary, and the pension obligation funds. Your information is an alternative with the information that you have given us this evening as well. We have scheduled our next committee meeting for February the 3rd, and that is to bring back the draft so we can review it of the policy before it goes to council. Is there anything else under other matters that we need to address? Because I know we were gonna finish this project before this committee moved with others, things that we need to tend to. Anything else, John, that you can think of to that regard?
Well, just to put on your radar, Maria's going with the auditor, and that is one of the tasks of the audit committee is so at some point the auditor will need to come and make a presentation to the committee.
Okay, thank you then. We'll note
So that'll
that.
jump in ahead of the line on the other stuff that we have planned, because
Yeah, just as a
Exactly.
just to put it on your radar, that's all I wanted to.
Well,
I don't have a date
specific, not
for
yet.
that.
Well, with that, thank you. And I want to say, if there's no other comments, nothing else, it is 5:24. We will adjourn the meeting, and we'll see you on February the 3rd.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Very